Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking one of the most famous images of 20th century American cinema.
Oh, another one.
Audrey Hepburn, that little black dress, gazing into the windows of Tiffany's. But we are looking beyond the glamour. We are diving deep into the 1961 film Breakfast at Tiffany's, not just as a cultural touchstone, but as a surprising cultural earthquake.
It really was. It was a revolution disguised in a $750,000 budget. And our stack of sources today, it reveals these intense creative and commercial battles that were fought just to get this movie made.
Right.
Because the original story, Truman Capote's novel, was considered fundamentally unadaptable for Hollywood, especially, in the repressive morality of the late 1950s.
And the central paradox of the entire film, I think, the tension that allowed the revolution to happen was the casting.
It's all about the casting.
They took the ultimate good girl, Audrey Hepburn, our innocent Princess Anne from Roman Holiday, and they cast her as Holly Golightly, a high society call girl and an emotional refugee. The sources clearly point out that this single decision fundamentally rerouted the course of women in the movies.
That's absolutely key. Before this film, if you saw a woman on screen having fun, living alone, asserting her independence, she was automatically the bad girl.
Automatically.
And the studio system, through the Production Code Administration, made sure she had to pay for that fun, usually through suffering or repentance or,
death. But because it was Audrey, because her star persona was so powerful and so associated with innocence, it acted as a perfect Trojan horse.
Exactly.
Suddenly being single, looking fabulous in New York, getting a little drunk, and not being obsessed with finding a husband seemed, well, not only acceptable, but aspirational. And critically, shame-free.
It made the independent woman look chic and achievable rather than punitive. And what makes this deep dive so fascinating is how close this whole project, this carefully constructed thing, came to just falling apart.
Oh, it was a near disaster.
The script was ferocious. The director, Blake Edwards, shot 2 very different endings. Audrey didn't even want the part. She was convinced she wasn't right for it.
And almost unbelievably, the studio almost cut the song that defined the entire movie.
Moon River. They almost cut Moon River.
We're going to unpack all of those near disasters, starting with the very dark, very emotional origin story of Holly Golightly herself. So to really understand why Capote created Holly, you have to start with his deeply, deeply turbulent emotional landscape. This story begins with a profound, just searing sense of early abandonment.
Capote's childhood trauma is the genesis of Holly. It all comes back to his mother, Lily May.
Lily May.
She changed her name to Nina when she was trying to get into high society, and she was the ultimate ghost in his life. She abandoned him repeatedly, just leaving him with relatives for months, even years at a time, while she chased her dream of becoming this rich, adored, high society woman.
And that left a huge gaping wound.
A massive one. And the sources even reveal the depth of her rejection. It goes back to before he was even born.
That's right.
The source material notes that Lily May actually attempted to abort him when she was pregnant.
Wow.
So you have this context of initial fundamental rejection, followed by constant, crushing emotional neglect. That created the adult Truman Capote. He was, as one source describes him, a person made of equal parts yearning and vengeance.
So if that's the emotional root, what was the psychological function of creating Holly Golightly? Why write her?
Holly became Lily May, but reconstructed. She was the mother figure put on the page where Capote could finally exert control over her narrative and, crucially, make the world adore her.
So when the world fell in love with Holly.
They were indirectly loving the figure who abandoned him, and by extension, loving Truman. He spoke of transforming Lily May's perfume into a bottomless fragrance called Holly Golightly. In that creation, he finally found the sense of permanence and attention he'd craved his entire life.
That is a fascinating, almost parasitic psychological need. He's essentially forcing the world to love the mother figure who abandoned him, making her immortal on his own terms.
Pretty much.
But Holly wasn't just a psychological projection, right? She was also a meticulously crafted social composite.
Precisely. She drew her deep existential anxieties, that rootlessness, the fear of belonging, from Capote himself. But she inherited her sheer glamour, her sophistication, and her social dreams from his coterie of Manhattan friends known as the Swans.
The Swans. These are the absolute epitome of elegance and status in the city.
The top of the top.
So give us the famous anecdote that connects Capote, the Swans, and the moment Holly was born.
Okay, so we have to look at the Gold Key Club story. It's foundational. Capote's friend Carol Marcus was staying at Gloria Vanderbilt's brownstone.
The very apartment that would become the model for Holly's.
The very one. And Carol Marcus was, at that point, trying to flee her second marriage. So she would meet Capote at this private club, the Gold Key Club. It was only open late and around 3 in the morning.
3 in the morning discussing existential flight. That feels very on brand.
It does. And during one of these late-night intense confessionals, Capote started discussing another girl, someone who was nothing like you, darling, but was a woman who was almost a hooker.
Okay.
But Capote wanted to infuse this real girl's gritty life with the sophistication of Carol Marcus. So they'd often leave the club as the sun was coming up, maybe 7 a.m., walk down to Fifth Avenue, stop at a cart for donuts.
Donuts and coffee.
And then they'd peer into Tiffany's, and that bizarre combination, the highest echelon of society, the vulnerability of a pre-dawn confession, and the symbol of unattainable permanence, which is Tiffany's, that created the DNA of Holly.
And the absolute queen of the swans, the figure Holly was created specifically to defy, was Babe Paley. Why was she so pivotal to Capote?
Yeah. Babe Paley was the swan queen. She was married to the CBS titan Bill Paley, and she was the definition of chic. Just the definition.
I mean, she was voted one of the best-dressed women in America 14 times.
14 times. Her style dictated trends instantly. The sources detail how she once took off a scarf during lunch and just, nonchalantly tied it around the handle of her handbag.
And that became a thing.
Within weeks, that simple gesture had become a massive New York fashion statement.
That is an incredible power of influence.
And this influence was backed by incredible visible wealth. She owned over $1 million worth of jewels, but, and here's the critical detail, those jewels were not usually in her home.
Where were they?
They were locked away in her husband's bank vault, which really highlights the ultimate control Bill Paley held over her status and her security.
So she had the visibility and the wealth, but not the autonomy. A gilded cage indeed. What was the reality of her marriage?
Despite all the public glamour, Babe was profoundly unhappy, and Capote knew the intimate details. She confessed to him that her marriage to Bill had been sexless since the early 1950s.
Wow.
Bill was known to be a public philanderer, openly flirting with her friends. She was miserable and, according to Capote, had twice attempted suicide. She was a trophy wife, something to look at, not to touch.
And what counsel did Capote, who had such a cynical but perhaps realistic view of society, give her?
He was brutally pragmatic. He urged her to stay put and accept her role. He told her, using his pet name for her, Bobolink, Bill bought you. Look upon being Mrs. William S. Paley as a job, the best job in the world. Accept it and be happy with it.
Brutal.
And Babe eventually conceded. She chose to stay caught in that marriage.
And this is where the character of Holly Golightly takes shape as a conscious rejection of that entire gilded life.
Absolutely. Holly was created to be the antithesis of Babe Paley. Holly refused to get married. She refused to settle down. She fiercely asserted her independence by selling herself, using her charm and companionship to finance her freedom, but always rejecting the permanence of a relationship.
So Babe Paley was the tragedy of belonging.
And Holly Golightly was the triumph of running away.
This brings us directly to the original novel, which sounds far darker and more subversive than the movie. Why did Hollywood view Capote's 1958 novel as essentially unadaptable?
Well, it violated every single rule of 1950s Hollywood storytelling. First, structurally, it was dismissed as more of a character sketch than a story.
Right.
It had, quote, no second act, a nameless gay protagonist, a motiveless drama, and an unhappy ending. You just couldn't sell that to the mainstream.
And the central fact of Holly's life, her ambiguous professional status, was a massive problem for the censors.
A huge problem, because Holly earns her independence through transactional relationships that are explicitly or implicitly sexual, and in the morality established by the Production Code Administration, the PCA, a character who transgressed sexually had to pay for it by the film's end.
But Holly doesn't.
Holly is fundamentally unrepentant. She achieves her independence and then runs away, which was morally unacceptable to Hollywood at the time.
But the narrator was the ultimate barrier to entry, right? I mean, the very nature of that central relationship challenged the core structure of the 1950s American family film.
Correct. The novel's narrator, who Holly calls Fred.
And also nicknames Maud.
Yes, Maud, which was a period slang term for a gay man. He is explicitly coded as homosexual. The sources stress that he and Holly share an intimate bond rooted in their sexually unorthodox dispositions. Their bond is platonic. It's based on mutual understanding, not erotic need or financial necessity.
So a non-sexual, non-financial relationship between a gay man and a proto-feminist call girl. That completely flew in the face of the era's obsession with the sanctity of heterosexual dominion.
It was revolutionary, which meant it had to be destroyed before it could be adapted. The producers, Marty Juro and Richard Shepard, they understood they had to convert this highly flammable protagonist and her confidant into a marketable traditional romantic comedy.
So the narrator had to become a struggling, handsome heterosexual writer, Paul Varjak.
Exactly. And the structure had to deliver a clear conclusion. Love conquers all. That was the mission. And the adaptation was completely dependent on one fundamental trait. If they removed the gay narrator and give the film a conventional romantic structure, maybe, just maybe, they could sneak in Holly's unconventional lifestyle.
But to do that, they needed an unimpeachable star.
An untouchable one.
Which brings us back to the rigidity of the Hollywood star machine, which had a very clear gender plan in the 1950s.
Oh, yeah. The system thrived on the slut or saint dialectic. It allowed studios to manufacture stars to fit the fears and fantasies of the day, turning actors into saleable commodities marketable to its era. You were either the girl next door, or you were the bad girl who paid the price.
Let's elaborate on the saint side first. The Doris Day archetype.
Doris Day was the ultimate saint. Her entire comedic persona revolved around the idea that she absolutely would not have a kiss without a legal agreement of marriage.
Right.
In films like Lover Come Back, the only way she survives the narrative is if, when she wakes up with Rock Hudson, he can quickly assure her they got married the night before in a drunken stupor. Sex was only honorable if marriage came first.
And on the other end, you have the Marilyn Monroe archetype, the bad girl.
The bad girl was often deliberately portrayed as the dumber and more childlike the better. You think of Marilyn, Jane Mansfield, Kim Novak. They were meant to be figures of male fantasy, but the moral system demanded they be punished.
If they enjoyed themselves too much.
They had to repent, get married, or face tragedy. The PCA enforced this. Too much sex was wrong, and too little of it was honorable. The audience was being warned, ladies, don't try this at home.
So when Audrey Hepburn, known for her purity, stepped into the role of Holly, she just broke the entire framework. Her image was so firmly on the side of duty and innocence.
Her image was meticulously cultivated. Roles like Princess Anne in Roman Holiday or Sister Luke in The Nun Story established her as a woman whose individuality was almost always eclipsed by duty. Princess Anne wanted freedom, but she was ultimately castle-bound by royal obligation.
And this extended even to her physical appearance, which brings us to the formidable, old-school Hollywood costumer Edith Head.
A legend. But Edith Head was a powerhouse who was not initially an Audrey fan.
Really?
Not at all. She was a fan of the 1950s ideal, embodied by Grace Kelly, the perfect 1950s beauty. Head's initial mission when dressing Audrey was to camouflage what she saw as Audrey's physical irregularities.
What does she mean by that?
The sources reveal Head used padded shoulders to broaden her narrow frame, avoided sleeveless blouses because of her too frail arms, and used full skirts or long dresses to hide her gangly legs and slender torso. Head saw herself as a costumer, not a fashion designer.
She prioritized functional camouflage over high style.
Right, because she feared fashion would quickly date the films.
But this entire strategy was deliberately subverted by director Billy Wilder during the production of Sabrina in 1953. And this really set the stage for the Tiffany's look years later. The sources call it the Sabrina insurrection.
It was a true insurrection. Wilder understood that for Audrey's character transformation in Sabrina, from mousy chauffeur's daughter to sophisticated woman, to be believable, she needed a truly revolutionary wardrobe. He explicitly rejected Edith Head's designs.
And instead, he forced a plan revealed in the studio memos.
A very specific plan. Audrey was sent to Paris to purchase a new-look wardrobe.
And the goal wasn't just fashion, it was deception, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The plan was to acquire clothes from Paris. They wanted Balenciaga, but Audrey ended up meeting Hubert de Givenchy and then smuggle the clothes back into the United States.
Why smuggle them?
To classify them as Audrey's private wardrobe. This allowed the studio to bypass two things. First, giving Edith Head the screen credit, and second, preventing American manufacturers from immediately reproducing the designs. It protected the freshness and exclusivity of this new look.
That is an incredible detail. The birth of Audrey's iconic style was rooted in international fashion smuggling and Hollywood turf wars.
It shows you the sheer power struggle between the old guard, like Head and the studio system, and the new artistic vision of Wilder, Audrey, and Givenchy. Audrey insisted on meeting the designer, Hubert de Givenchy, who was only 26 at the time.
And he was reluctant at first.
Very. He was too busy, but he allowed her to look through his previous season's collection.
And that meeting changed both of their lives.
It created one of the most famous, profound, symbiotic relationships between a star and a designer in history. Givenchy was a strident follower of Balenciaga. He valued simplicity and line over complexity and function. He didn't worry about whether the skirt is wide enough to walk in or how a woman looked getting into and out of a taxi.
He valued beauty over function, which is exactly what Hollywood had been avoiding.
And Audrey became the muse he was waiting for. Her innate elegance made simplicity look sophisticated, not just minimal. She was forever branded as a young woman who asserted her individuality through superior taste, not superior curves.
Billy Wilder famously joked that she single-handed may make bosoms a thing of the past.
And he was right. This deliberate, calculated shift smuggled in some new ideas from the women of the future through the subversive power of glamour. It changed the feminine ideal forever. By the time Breakfast at Tiffany's went into production, the contract stipulated as a non-negotiable clause that Givenchy would design her costumes.
Okay, so the star was secured and the look was defined, but the script still needed to satisfy a star who was deeply nervous about playing an amoral character.
Audrey was intensely reluctant. Her husband at the time, Mel Ferrer, openly disapproved of her playing a call girl, and she feared the part was genuinely outside her range.
What specifically was she worried about?
She had to play an extended drunk scene and exhibit deep depression, what Holly calls the mean reds. She just felt too controlled, too proper for the part.
So it took a massive financial incentive to get her on board. We're talking $750,000, which was enormous money for the time. And crucially, she got director approval.
Yes, and that director approval led immediately to the firing of John Frankenheimer, who was attached initially. And the producers were under immense pressure to make this amoral character palatable. So they brought in screenwriter George Axelrod.
Who wrote classics like The 7-Year Itch.
The very same. He was brought in for the major structural overhaul, including this critical bait-and-switch scheme to handle the PCA.
Right. So Axelrod had to convert the gay narrator into a straight leading man, Paul Varjak. And he needed a strategy to distract the Hollywood censors from Holly's actual profession.
Axelrod's solution was brilliant. He intentionally exaggerated the sexual activity of Paul Varjak with his wealthy older patron, 2E, played by Patricia Neal. He made Paul a gigolo, basically focusing the censor's scrutiny on the male lead's morality instead of the female lead's.
He threw a shiny, slightly smutty object at the censors so they wouldn't notice the quiet, subtle subversion happening with Holly.
Exactly. And the Production Code Administration, led by Jeffrey Sherlock, took the bait. The PCA memos reveal Sherlock objected explicitly to the arrangement between Paul and 2E.
What were they mad about?
They were furious about a scene where Paul wakes up and 2E has very gently begun to unbutton his shirt, and where Paul smiles benignly in his sleep after their off-screen sex. Sherlock insisted that depicting or implying sex outside of marriage for financial gain was unacceptable for both characters.
So how did the producers leverage that intense focus on Paul?
They argued that Paul had to be unambiguously red-blooded and heterosexual. It was a necessary change from Capote's gay narrator. They insisted that making Paul a gigolo was necessary to establish him as heterosexual and give him depth, and that forced the censors into a corner.
So by making Paul's sexuality the primary contentious battleground,
they forced the PCA to accept Holly's amoral life as the lesser evil needed for balance, and they got their way.
It's a genius piece of cinematic negotiation. And while Axelrod was fighting the censors, he was also softening Holly to cater to Audrey's image.
He had to. Axelrod systematically removed the tougher edges of Capote's creation. He cut the detail of Holly's illegitimate pregnancy and miscarriage and focused on transforming her into a cockeyed dreamer who was more lovable and innocent.
He added those whimsical scenes, like trying to engrave a ring from a Cracker Jack box at Tiffany's.
Exactly, to cement her emotional purity and tighten the heterosexual romance with Paul.
But despite the script being smoothed out, the sources reveal intense personal and creative friction on set. Let's start with the almost unbelievable issue of Audrey's husband, Mel Ferrer, constantly being on set.
Mel Ferrer was a major destructive force in the production. He openly disapproved of the role and often publicly reprimanded Audrey, which caused huge awkwardness. The cast and crew witnessed so many agonizing moments.
Like what?
Patricia Neal, who played 2E, vividly recalled a dinner where Audrey rested her elbows on the table, just a casual gesture. Mel took a fork, slipped the prongs under her elbows, and loudly stated, "Ladies do not put their elbows on the table," making sure everyone at the dinner heard him.
That kind of public humiliation of his wife must have been disastrous for her performance.
Blake Edwards suspected Mel was counter-directing Audrey, intentionally hindering her performance and undermining her confidence. And given Audrey was already so full of self-doubt about playing Holly, having her husband acting like a constant drill sergeant in public made the atmosphere toxic.
It's astonishing she could deliver a performance about total independence while being micromanaged like that.
It really is. And the male lead, George Peppard, was another source of conflict, especially regarding the script.
He was a devoted method actor.
Yes, and he used his rising star status to demand changes, particularly trying to diminish Patricia Neal's role. Neal recalled that while she had known and adored Peppard from their time at the Actors Studio, he had grown cold and conceited. He operated under the belief that his status granted him the power to make it better by rewriting it in his head.
What specifically was he fighting for?
He was fighting to remove scenes that established Tui's independent strength and focus them entirely on Paul. Neal recounted a near physical fight between Peppard and director Blake Edwards over blocking a scene. Peppard was constantly trying to change the established direction.
And Edwards wasn't a fan of the method.
Not at all. Edwards had a strong vaudeville background, so he had very little patience for the cerebral approach of method acting. He privately thought Peppard was a piss-poor actor who struggled with simple line delivery. Ultimately, Edwards had to compromise and allow some thinning of the supporting role just to keep production moving.
Of course, we cannot discuss the production battles without addressing the film's most glaring, enduring controversy, the offensive portrayal of Mr. Yunioshi.
The character of Holly's Japanese neighbor, Mr. Yunioshi, played by Mickey Rooney and heavily stylized Yellowface, remains the source of justifiable outrage. And Paramount tried to manage the situation poorly from the start.
How so?
They fabricated a foreign comedian named Ohio Arigato in a publicity stunt, only to later reveal the part went to Rooney. And while they did hire the wife of the Japanese Chamber of Commerce's cultural information director as a technical advisor, her influence was minimal.
And Edwards' vaudeville sensibility just made the problem far worse.
Absolutely. Edwards and Rooney were old collaborators. The performance leaned heavily into slapstick, loud, and offensive caricature. Years later, the film faced protests and canceled screenings, and producer Richard Shepard was profoundly embarrassed.
Especially when the great Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa,
who was his client, expressed how deeply offended he was by the portrayal. It's an element of the film that just does not survive contemporary viewing.
Let's transition to one of the creative triumphs that almost didn't survive, the music. Henry Mancini and Johnny Mercer had the daunting task of writing a song for Audrey Hepburn to sing on a fire escape.
What huge task. Mancini was already famous for his modern, sophisticated jazz pop sound from Peter Gunn, but he was under massive pressure. He knew his challenge was unique. He had to write a song that could be sung by Audrey Hepburn, who had a very short vocal range.
How short?
He described it as just an octave and one.
That is an incredibly tight constraint for a composer.
It paralyzed him initially. Everything he tried felt forced and died quickly. He struggled for weeks until, in a moment of sudden inspiration, the entire melody came to him. It was built around 3 simple core notes, C, G, and F.
Wow.
Staying almost exclusively on the white keys and within her limited vocal range, he wrote the entire simple, evocative melody in just 20 minutes.
And that melody became Moon River.
Yeah.
And Johnny Mercer, the lyricist, was himself feeling obsolete in the era of rock and roll.
Right. Mercer, who had written timeless classics like That Old Black Magic, saw the collaboration as a rejuvenation. He loved Capote's novel. He wrote 3 versions of the lyric before settling on the iconic lines. He successfully harnessed the poignant, multi-layered frictions of the story.
It works as this innocent description of 2 wanderers.
But it's also laden with the weariness of heartache and the recognition that dreams rarely come true.
And this perfect song, which would go on to define the film and win 2 Oscars, was almost cut by a studio executive.
Almost. After an early preview screening, a Paramount executive named Marty Rakin, who wanted a big, traditional orchestral score, stood up and demanded, "The fucking song has to go."
That's incredible.
He felt it was too quiet, too intimate. He suggested replacing it with something louder, maybe from a composer like Gordon Jenkins.
So what was the defense? How did Shepard save it? It must have been powerful to face down a major executive like that.
Producer Richard Shepard stood firm. He told Rakin the song was crucial precisely because it was quiet. He argued that the whole film was an act of transition for Holly, who was actually a vulnerable, scared girl named Lula Mae from Tulip, Texas.
Right.
He emphasized that the song needed to sound small and intimate, like the true heart of the girl she was trying to leave behind. He said, "This film is about the girl from Tulip, Texas, singing to herself on a fire escape. It needs to sound exactly like that." And Shepard's insistence, tying the song directly to the character's emotional truth, ensured it stayed.
And thank God it did.
If the song was the film's emotional heart, then the little black dress was its defining aesthetic armor. The LBD allowed the paradoxical Holly Golightly to succeed visually.
The little black dress outside Tiffany's is perhaps the most iconic image in film history. So what was the historical and cultural significance of the LBD that made it so powerful on Audrey?
Historically, black dresses in films carried heavy, often unchaste connotations. In the Victorian era, black signaled sexual experience or mourning. By the 1920s, the flappers used it to reject their parents' values.
And in 40s and 50s cinema.
The women in black were often the anti-heroines, the powerful, scheming bitches like Margot Channing in All About Eve or Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard.
So on Audrey, the LBD was meant to carry that sophisticated, powerful, slightly immoral connotation, but her image redeemed it.
Exactly. It created a sophisticated irony. The LBD on Audrey carried those connotations of power and sexual experience, but her wholesomeness transformed it into something elegant and aspirational. It became an assertion of self, not a punishment of sin.
And the sources note how the dress's efficiency and simplicity made it a symbol for the working woman.
Right, a woman who didn't need external embellishment to be commanding.
And the functionality of the dress itself was a key detail, designed for maximum cinematic impact.
It was. Jim and Chi designed two versions for the opening scene. One was extremely tight for standing perfectly still, which Audrey called her armor of love.
And the other?
The other had a carefully hidden slit down the side to allow for fluid movement when she walked around the outside of the store. This dichotomy, armor versus movement, perfectly encapsulated Holly's entire approach to life.
Speaking of that iconic opening, the logistics involved in shooting it sound like pure, unadulterated chaos.
Oh, it was almost a logistical nightmare. The famous scene outside Tiffany's on Fifth Avenue had to be shot quickly. It was Sunday, October 2nd, 1960, and they started at dawn, around 5 a.m., trying to capture the eerie quiet of the city before it woke up.
But they were fighting two clock deadlines simultaneously.
The first being the inevitable crowd.
Of course.
Even on a chilly Sunday, the sheer fact that Audrey Hepburn was on Fifth Avenue meant a crowd would inevitably gather and ruin the shot. But the second deadline was international.
Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev.
Exactly. He was scheduled to appear on Fifth Avenue at 7:30 a.m. as part of a high-profile visit to the U.S. So they had a hard stop time of 7:30 to complete all shots, pack up, and clear the street before a major geopolitical figure arrived.
That is high-stakes filmmaking, racing the sun, the fans, and a Soviet head of state. Now, let's talk about the film's climax. Blake Edwards, feeling that Axelrod's quiet ending lacked punch, threw out the script and wrote his own dramatic finish.
He did. Axelrod's ending was very introspective. Holly finds and names the cat Sam, and she and Paul walk off in silence, implying a quiet, hopeful future. But Edwards felt that ending didn't crescendo. It lacked the dramatic imperative required for a major Hollywood film to stick the landing.
He liked to manipulate through drama.
He did. So he secretly wrote and shot an entirely alternative ending 6 weeks after the final draft was submitted.
And his alternative ending introduced the dramatic tension, the rain, and the explicit metaphor of the cage.
He needed a rhetorical flourish to force Holly's change of heart and give the audience the catharsis they expected. He added the deliberate drama of the rain-soaked taxi scene and Paul's famous monologue.
"You're chicken. You've got no guts."
"Baby, you're already in that cage. You built it yourself." That metaphor, accusing her of imprisoning herself through fear, provided the emotional confrontation the film needed to climax, forcing her to choose love and belonging over continued isolated flight. Edwards shot both endings, but wisely went with the dramatic one.
The film was, of course, a massive commercial success. It won 2 Oscars. And yet, the director's choice of a romantic ending meant the film's morality was still debated after its release.
Oh, Paramount was highly cautious about its reception, knowing the book's reputation. They used the slang term cook repeatedly in their marketing campaign, a real kooky dame.
To normalize Holly's behavior for the mainstream.
Exactly. They wanted to assure mothers that Audrey had not made an indecent movie and that Tiffany's was just a simple love story about a simple, fun-loving girl.
Which is exactly what Truman Capote despised about the adaptation.
He publicly disowned the film for the rest of his life. He said it was thin and pretty, whereas it should have been rich and ugly. He felt the Hollywoodization had turned it into a mawkish Valentine to New York City and Holly.
He saw his complex portrait of emotional survival reduced to a tidy romance.
He did.
But, despite Capote's disappointment, the film accomplished something truly profound and progressive for an entire generation of women who were tired of the 1950s constraints.
It was a game changer. Letty Cotton Pogrebin, who later co-founded Mrs. Magazine, hailed Holly as her formative pre-feminist role model. She stressed that Holly's significance was her independence living single, being in charge of her own finances and not being defined by a husband.
At a time when women felt haunted by this set of feminine ideals wherever you went.
Absolutely. And the film critic Judith Christ captured the sheer progressiveness of Holly Golightly's depiction perfectly.
What did she say?
Christ praised the film as a crucial, progressive step in the depiction of women. She noted that Holly was Audrey's first multi-layered character, and, most importantly, she was not punished for her transgressions. She didn't suffer a tragic accident or repent and become a nun. She was simply accepted for her imperfections.
So by allowing Holly to run away with her independence intact, or at least trade it for love without being morally shamed,
The film moved well beyond the oppressive 30s-40s morality.
this deep dive has shown us this massive transformation. Truman's emotional pain fueling Holly's public freedom, Edith Head's dated aesthetic giving way to Givenchy's modern chic, and Axelrod's wit ultimately needing Edward's dramatic flair to succeed. The film truly functioned as a Trojan horse,
It did.
using a cover of elegance and Audrey's innocence to smuggle in some new ideas from the women of the future.
And that transformation all hinges on the climax. But it's important to remember that the choice Holly makes in The Rain to embrace Paul and name the cat is fundamentally ambiguous in its real-world implications.
Right.
As Judith Christ pointed out, just because you're going to give the cat a name doesn't mean that the cat isn't going to go back to the alley.
That ambiguity leads us back to the real-life cost of independence versus belonging, which we saw in Holly's primary inspiration, Babe Paley.
Indeed, Holly chooses vulnerability and belonging in the film, but the source of her inspiration, Babe Paley, only found the freedom to leave her unhappy, sexless marriage years later. And it was when Capote himself delivered a final, destructive act.
He published details about her husband Bill Paley's public infidelity in Esquire.
Yes, and that public betrayal made separation not a vulnerable choice, but mandatory. It allowed her to finally leave him without facing the judgment society usually reserved for women who broke their marriages.
So for you, the listener, the final provocative thought is this.
In life, unlike in the movies, the cost of true freedom and belonging is often only achieved after a catastrophic external event forces the issue. The alley is always waiting.